Jonathan Pageau, welcome to the pod.
It's great to see you, Rick.
So I was thinking that 4 years ago you came on. You're actually my third guest ever, and so I think that you are only the second guest to come back for a second round. You and Dr. Ben Carson, if you know who he is, you guys are both the only kind of repeat guests. So you're in a very exclusive club for a very inexclusive channel.
All right.
So welcome.
That's great. Yeah, it feels special. Maybe I'm not sure.
It may be special 20 years from now. You never know.
No,
You never know. But your profile and your philosophical, I guess, wonderings have gone broad over the last 4 years. It's been really an exciting 4 years to sort of watch from the periphery how your presence and your ideas have really expanded. I was in DC back in February, and this is the last time I saw Jordan Peterson in person. And I had an opportunity to spend 3 hours with him in an office watching the inauguration. It was snowed out, so we couldn't go to the outside ceremony. So there were 9 of us in an office. Had a great conversation with him. Mentioned that you and I had a conversation a while back, and really enjoyed that because I know that you guys are close. And the last thing that I said to Dr. Peterson and Mrs. Peterson about Europe, because this is 3 weeks before ARC, I said that it's apparent that the reason why Europe has lost their way is because they forgot beauty is power. And I would imagine for someone like yourself who's just entrenched in the arts, entrenched in symbolism, entrenched in the theology of being, I imagine that is very evident for someone like you. So I guess first of all, tell us, what is your relationship with sort of beauty and how it enlivens us? And then also, how do we begin to re-enliven the West?
Yeah. I think your insight is right. I think it's an attack to realize why it's been a problem. It's been a long ways coming. This attack on beauty has been going on since the beginning of the modern age. And a good way of thinking about it is to understand that beauty, in some ways, what it is, it's the manner in which universal truths or universal principles are adapted to a very specific reality, a very specific place. And so beauty isn't just the universal, because there is a universal aspect to it. And it isn't just multiplicity or trains, but it is the joining of the two together. And so as Europe, becomes suspicious of its own existence and its own identity, its own history, starts to use postmodern arguments to deconstruct its own heritage, then it is normal that it would also be suspicious of the beauty, because the beauty is an image of how our identities, whether our nations, our tribes, obviously our beliefs, are connected to that universal truth. And if you're trying to deconstruct that, then you don't want to remember the connection between what houses look like in Norway and how that is intrinsic to the people there, and how it connects also to all the houses in all the world, like how it is in some ways a version of a universal reality.
Yeah. And it seems like it's a very inconvenient thing to bring that up in certain circles. You look at the dystopian-esque Russia right now. You look at some of these denominations. I think yesterday we saw the split of the Anglican Church occur, where they forget that the Father and the Son are masculine for a reason. We see all these things begin to sort of tear down society and tear down institutions, and they just don't see it sometimes. And I think that some of them get it switched. Some of them say that power is beautiful. They like the sexiness of power. But I think whenever you put the power first, you never really in the end get beauty. You might get some seduction, you might get some attraction, but you just get power. And it's a wandering, fading type of power in the end.
And that's a good insight, because a good way to understand an inversion of beauty and it related to power is fashion, or the way that we are interested in novelty for novelty's sake, because novelty is very powerful. It arises in us that sense of surprise and that sense of, you could say, of wonder maybe, and shock, also shock value. And so fashion, that's how it functions. And a lot of contemporary architecture, for example, is based on shock. Frank Gehry's art is obviously based on shock, to give you the impression that the building is impossible, to give you the impression that the building is falling down, all of these tropes. And so you can see that this is power. Like power functions that way. Whereas true beauty is a reflection of truth, right? We always, the Platonists say that beauty is the expression of truth, right? It is truth manifested in the world appears as beauty. Goodness and truth manifest themselves as beauty. And so in a world where you're trying to break everything down and remake the world according to your ideological opinion, all of that is an enemy. And I think, and the thing about, let's say, what the split in the Anglican Church, and this is going to be very difficult for some people to digest, but there are people in these institutions that actually hate them. And when they rise to power and they hate everything about the institution in which they are, then they don't mind if it breaks apart. Either it will be shaped to our ideology or it will be destroyed. Either way, I win. And so that's the thing about people who actually hate our history and hate the way in which these forms are connected to memory and to truth.
Yeah. And it certainly seems that the way society has gone, at least since the 1960s, you have to move up the ladder of victimhood if you're ever able to stay current with the expectations of the sort of mob that seems to what's happening in the Anglican Church. I was telling my wife last night, she wouldn't let me put this in writing, but she's not going to watch the podcast, so I can say it here. It's safe. It never really happened. I said that now that they have this lady as Archbishop of Canterbury, even though it's a lifelong term, they're going to find a way to get rid of her because they have to push it the next degree. And the next degree, obviously, either going to be a Muslim. They will have it's in London. It'll be a Muslim Archbishop of Canterbury, or it'll be a gay Archbishop.
Trans would be the thing that would win in terms of that story. Yeah,
that's right. The idea of a Caucasian-looking woman, that was yesterday. Like, we've got to move forward here.
It's a temporary step towards absolute kind of confusion of identity, for sure.
Yeah, but just because of the state of London right now, the political atmosphere there, and the desire for peace, and you see how weak this process went with this selection, I suspect that during our lifetimes, Jonathan, we'll see an Islamic Archbishop of Canterbury. That's my prediction. We'll see if that comes to fruition or not.
That might be a bit of a stretch. At that point, the church will just cease to exist, which is also, I don't think so. The thing about these pushes is that they never go just in one direction, and it's actually not possible for that to happen. And so one of the things that is happening within Christianity is the assault, let's say, on the deconstructionist and these kind of postmodern arguments against the church, even within the church, that's subverting it. It is simultaneously making, let's say, the church less powerful in the world, right? It's kind of bringing it down, but it's also purifying it at the same time. And so there will be remainders that will appear. This whole narrative of remainder in scripture is a way to understand it, is that you're also kind of paring it down and you're making the truth more visible and more shiny, you could say, for those that want it. And so if you look at the resurgence of Christianity now that's happening in the United States, and that hasn't happened in Europe yet, but it's coming. But the resurgence in the United States is a traditional resurgence. People are becoming Orthodox, becoming Catholic. They're going towards Anglo-Catholic if they can, Presbyterian, but like more conservative liturgical Presbyterian. So these are actually the types of Christianity that are growing, because as the assault is happening and is kind of eating everything up, it's also at the same time paring down the truth, you could say, or let's say acting, like gold in a fire, right? It's actually purifying it at the same time.
Do you sense that, and I want to go back to your comment on the idea that the new creativity, the new sort of trending arc is shock. That's what ends up being in the end. Do you sense that the majority of that shock, or perhaps even all of that shock outside of Christendom, seems to drift toward the chaotic, the dark, the evil, the opposing symbols that point us in the wrong direction rather than the right direction? I don't sense any of the chaos or the sort of the exploration to be, I don't sense the majority of it moving towards the holy. I sense it moving toward the chaotic and the unholy.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's actually an interesting time right now because, let's say, like you said, since really it's after World War II, and especially since the 60s, there has been a kind of inverted story, or there has been a desire to to prop up the exception, to prop up the opponent, to prop up the idea of opposing authority as being something that is valuable. And so that has grown and grown. And so all of our cultural forms have that, even the ones you like Star Wars. Star Wars is a rebel alliance against an authority. But as that plays out, there's a reasonable reason for that, right? It's a good story. But if you keep pushing it, then you become basically a Satanist. Like at some point, it becomes a kind of satanic trope where all authority is always evil and all exceptions and all inversion is the true reality. And it just gets worse and worse. But the problem is that as you push that story too far, it just becomes a lie. It's just not true. And things that aren't true, you can't force them on people for too long. And so we're noticing the collapse of Hollywood for that very reason, which is that as people have tried to push this narrative further and to make us care about the most exceptional random thing, and that is the most anti-order, people have stopped caring and people just are checking out. And so because of that, Disney is losing hundreds of billions of dollars, and maybe hundreds of billions might be a lot, but they're losing a lot of money. And then Hollywood is just collapsing. And then what's happening in that collapse is a transformation. And so if you look at some of the movies that have been popular in the past few years, like that Formula One movie that came out was just a random Formula One movie, it seems, with Brad Pitt, made huge amounts of money, was very popular. And it's about a guy who's trying to be the best at what he can be, and he gets the girl and wins the race. It's what? I thought you could never tell those stories again. But it seems as the decadent narrative collapses, in some ways, the true stories are going to start to appear again.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So I do this little exercise before I jump on a podcast with someone. I did this 4 years ago when we first spoke, and then I did it again yesterday. I always go on the YouTube channel and sort by most viewed videos so I can see what sort of topics that are really buzzing. I think that 4 years ago, if memory serves, let's just take a screenshot of it. I think 4 years ago, it was obviously heavy symbolism. It was you and your brother doing a couple of pods back then, you and JBP doing some conversations back then. But when I look now, and I was surprised because I like seeing all the Marvel, the new Tangled analysis that you did. I like seeing that there, but I was shocked to see how many of the top 10 or top 15 most viewed videos on your channel had to do with darkness, had to do with the beast or 666 or the symbolism thereof. What do you gather from that? I mean, you're paying closer attention to your topics and that sort of thing. Has that been a long-term trend, or is that fairly recent from the last year or two?
I mean, I think it's part of the reason, because people are confused. People see these images appear in culture and they have a sense of their relevance, but sometimes they don't necessarily understand them. So people are getting very weird vibes from AI, getting very weird vibes from some of the tech CEOs, from some of the moves that governments are making, like digital ID, or during COVID, the types of restrictions that were placed on us. And people are trying to make sense of it, and trying to make sense of it religiously. And so I think that's the reason why some of these videos, like the video on 666, for example, or the video on the beast, all of this stuff is popular, is because people are trying to make sense of the darkness that they see around them. And so I'm very careful in those videos to not act in a simplistic prophetic way, saying now is the time of the end times or that kind of stuff. But I rather try to help people use the trope that are in scripture to help them understand, let's say, some of the tendencies and some of the patterns that they're seeing in culture.
Yeah, and I think that you handled that very tastefully, the ones that I've seen as well. So I appreciate you doing that being out there. There's a lot of darkness on the internet. It feels sometimes that the internet is controlled by demons, right? I mean, there's this recent sort of conversational topic about are there demons in AI, or is AI a demonic type of force? But it seems that the whole internet has this sort of demonic bent overall.
Yeah, I think we have to be cautious when we talk about this, because sometimes people can misunderstand what it is that we're talking about. But I do think that this is a reasonable way of understanding it, and I can explain it very simply if people want to just follow the argument. And even the very fact that someone, for example, will use attention to get money, Right. And so this is one of the issues with the social media platforms, is that they try to, in some ways, market your attention. So the only purpose was to get you on the platform as long as possible so that they can make as much money as they can. And so even without knowing it, the people who are doing that are, because they're in some ways worshiping mammon, they end up serving all of these demonic influences. That is, that in order to get you to click, I'm going to appeal to rage constantly. I'm going to appeal to lust. I'm going to appeal to all your sins, because those are the most immediate way to keep you keep your attention on this website. And so even without knowing it, it means that what we've set ourselves up in a way that these demonic intelligences or these demonic wills are writing the large aspects of the internet, because we're basically they're appealing to that part in us, let's say the aspect in us that is subservient to these, let's say, these demonic patterns.
You had an interesting back and forth, if memory serves, maybe a month or two ago at was it the Northeastuary event where Vanderklay and
Midwestering on AI?
Yeah, on AI with Vanderklay and Vervaeke, I think, on the stage there. That was the one, I think, where Vervaeke said that he refuses to use LLMs now.
Yeah, that's his position. He says he's not using LLMs.
It's a lot of extra work, it seems, but he's got the brain power to do it. I don't feel sorry for him.
Yeah, but I mean, I understand why he says that. It is, we can see where it's going, and we can see that in some ways the LLMs and the GPTs are really becoming a scary monster. And even those that in some ways were trying to be above board, Altman announced just a few days ago that they're going to add a adult version of GPT now. And so it's okay. So now infinite porn, like in ways that you never could have imagined, is going to be fed into the same thing, the same like beast that is also helping you to figure out philosophy or figure out all these things. And so it's let's just say that it's not great.
Yeah. Did you make a comment that you regularly receive some comments or communication from people through the internet about their relationship with LLMs?
Yeah, well, it's just that people fall into these weird loops with the LLMs, is that they start to feed it and talk with it and exchange with it. And then at some point, they obviously start to think that the LLM is an actual being, or sometimes even that it's enlightened, or that it's a saint or a god, or that it is in some ways Christian, and so it's definitely causing psychosis. Like, it is bringing about psychotic things. People have sent me GPTs that are like oracles. Like they send me these links of GPTs that answer like oracles. And when you interact with it a little, just not very long, and you realize that it's quite superficial, but people get sucked into this stuff.
Yes, that's scary. Whew.
But the problem is that with the LLMs, what's going on too, one of the issues is that the way that the LLM functions is kind of like this auto self-organization. And so they don't know how it works. They don't know what the LLM completely, what it is that it's doing. And so because of that, it's very disturbing. They don't have access to the internal processes completely. So what are we doing? It feels sometimes like a giant Ouija board.
Yeah.
And sometimes it does feel that way, because, and people think that I'm being silly saying a Ouija board, but a Ouija board is the cumulative qualities of a group, right? So you don't need to believe in demons, let's say, to think that like a Ouija board can function, because it's a bunch of people putting all their hands on the same piece. And it is a kind of unconscious thing between us that is moving with a Ouija board in order to give you the answer. It's qualities that are merged between us. And that's what AI is. AI is basically millions of people for years and years have been offering their judgment to AI, training it and telling it what's important. And now it's running. Now it's answering our questions. So
Yeah. So I stopped doing a podcast for about a year. What happened was you know, that you've got these big podcasters that they have their script writers that leave the big podcaster, they set up the script writing company and they say, come to us, we'll show you how to hit it big on YouTube. And I found that this guy was using AI to write the scripts. And because he wanted me to post every day. So I said, you have to tell me what to say because I don't have that kind of content or that kind of time. And so I figured out he was using AI to write the scripts, and I talked to him about it. And I was like, I can't do this. So I ended up getting rid of him. But my problem with it is I don't want to train AI that I'm going to obey and say what it wants me to say. That's a bad situation to find yourself in. And so I was upset because I had put a couple of things out there. I've taken them down since. Put a couple of things out there with me regurgitating AI about some sort of business principle or whatever it was. And the AI sees that. It sees that. And so.
Yeah, and it's also usually not. You can be tricked by AI a few times, but once you pay attention to it a little bit, as soon as it's a little more than one or two sentences, you can tell now, pretty much. Not all the time, but you can often tell that people use AI to write their script. Sometimes I listen to YouTube videos now, and I'm like, this guy's just reading a GPT script. And it's hard to exactly put your finger on it, but once you start to see it, it's really annoying.
It is. Well, I want to get into business a little bit. I'm a business guy. I don't have any philosophical or theological training. About 3 years ago, I got one of these from you, this icon with the cross. You probably can't see it that well here, but sort of keep it out where I'm working. But it's got the golden cross with the green mosaics around it. But I don't know. I'm a Baptist. I don't know what to do with this. Do I pray to it? Do I put my hands on it? What do I do with this, Jonathan?
He's like, do I pray to it? I mean, this is it is a cross. And so obviously, just like your Bible, or you would have a certain amount of reverence, obviously, to something that has deep meaning in it. So you wouldn't leave it on the floor in your bathroom. You wouldn't want to do that anyways, because it's precious. Like, it's made in a way that's precious. And so I think you have to treat it with a certain amount of reverence because it represents something holy, like you would a picture of your mother or something like that. And then it's a reminder, right? And it's a reminder of the cross. And it is also like a testament to beauty, and how the surprise of the cross, you could say, that is this horrible device of torture, is that it flowered, is a good way of thinking about, is that after the resurrection, it showed itself to be the tree of life. It showed itself to be fruitful and to be, in a mysterious way, the most beautiful thing. And so I think that just remembering that, and you can put it up on a wall, you can put it up on a shelf, just so that when you walk by, you remember. That's enough.
Okay, good. Now, I was worried for a second there. I didn't know. I've never used it as a coaster or anything like that. I always kind of kept it out looking at it. But it's just so beautiful, and I really love your work. This is not my regular place where I shoot. This is my work office, but I have here Jonah and the sea monster up here, kind of in the corner. You kind of see a little bit of it. But that really speaks to me every time I think about troubles and heartache. I look to that, and it gives me a sort of refreshing understanding of my relationship with God. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy that it's helpful. That's the purpose of some of these images, definitely, to do that.
Yeah. And so you've really showed a lot of us through your work at the Symbolic World Press and your various artistic and learning and teaching endeavors that business itself can be beauty, right? You're producing beautiful things that help us have beautiful thoughts, beautiful ideas, redemptive types of frameworks come to mind when we see these things. But I think a lot of us are really interested on how things work, because I think I saw an interview from you maybe 4 or 5 years ago. You were interviewed about being an artist, and I think you made the comment, which I found hilarious, that if you're going to be an artist, you just got to determine you're always going to be broke or always be poor or something like that.
Yeah, that's if you go in. It doesn't mean that's going to happen, but I think for people who want to pursue that career, you have to accept that it's okay. If you're going to be, you might be poor, and that's completely fine. We live in the best world to be poor in. Being poor 500 years ago and being poor now is not the same. So we could take advantage of that and then do the things we want to do, but then also there is a type of genteel poverty where you can be poor without being, or you can be broke, or you could say, or not have money without being a poverty mindset, without living in a poverty mindset. You can still care for the things you have. You can still be attentive to the things that have been given to you and make them beautiful and kind of organize your life. So there's that, but it doesn't mean that it has to be that way. If you dedicate yourself and you give yourself legitimately to what you're doing. And you're attentive also to the market and to the people looking. Because one of the problems with artists is that sometimes they're prideful. And when you're prideful, sometimes you don't learn because you don't want to take criticism. One of the greatest thing an artist can do is take criticism. When someone comes up to me and says, they ask me about their drawing, what can I do to make art? What can I do? And I asked them, I said, are you taking classes? Are you involved with people that are ruthless with you, that'll be ruthlessly critical? Because if you're just showing your drawings to your parents and your family, you're being lied to. And it's fine. That's what family is for, is to make you feel good, but that's not how. And so I think that if you're dedicated with truth towards your art and you're attentive to whether or not you should be doing it, then there's no reason not for success not to come. Success probably will come. It might take a while. 10 years could take 10 years, 15 years, but it will.
Yeah, yeah. I like reading the letters of Vincent van Gogh to his brother Theo, who was sort of his main supporter throughout his artistic career. And Vincent never really found very much success, but he was always trying new things, moving around to different places, finding himself in very erratic types of relationships. And so I enjoy going and seeing his paintings either online or in person, and seeing how he took those new inputs and even a lot of negative feedback and pivoted from there. I imagine those are sort of lessons that you as an artist were able to bring into the business world, trying to figure out where the market demand was, where it wasn't. We tried this once, let's not do that again, that sort of thing. But how did you go from sort of being an artist podcaster to being someone that has a number of these endeavors underway? Which was first? How did that come about? And then how did you decide which sort of services and products to bolt on to what you'd already built?
For sure, there's a vision. I learned to carve icons. I learned to make icons for the church. And in some ways, what I was doing was learning a language, learning a visual language, but also a symbolic language, which is why I don't only talk about visual things. I talk about all kinds of different aspects of life based on the language. But I've always known that language would ultimately, its best service is to God, but that it can also be used and applied to different things that are part of life. So even when I was learning to write, to carve icons and to do that, I already had the idea that one day I wanted to write popular stories or make popular objects in order to be able to demonstrate how these patterns can also connect to the most immediate world. And so, for example, we wrote this story called God's Dog, Mathieu, my brother and I, which was in some ways an application of a lot of the patterns we talk about, but in a story form. We wrote that in 2008, 2009. So way before we were making videos. It was always part of and even before I was a professional icon carver. So it was always part of the plan. But as I noticed Disney collapsing and I noticed the woke storytelling, let's say, running out of steam, I also realized that we have a great opportunity right now, which is an opportunity and a responsibility. To start with the responsibility, one of the problems with people that are more conservative or that are more on the right or whatever is that we're really good at criticizing, but we're not very good at making. So we're good at criticizing culture. We're good at complaining about the state of education. We're good about doing all of that, but we don't seem very good at creating beauty and implementing. So I thought, since I am criticizing, I also have a responsibility to continue to put things out there that are celebratory and that we can get behind in a way that is not just nostalgic, like we just want to revive Shakespeare or whatever, but that is present. It's now. It's something that's alive now and that can be supported. So that's why we started doing these fairy tale series with Symbolic World Press, going completely against the grain of the contemporary culture, making them beautiful, making them heirloom quality objects, making them highly deliberate, beautiful illustrations, all of that in order to kind of counter the trash kids books that are so prominent on the market. So that's what it is. In some ways, it is a business opportunity too, because the other people, Disney doesn't want the fairy tales anymore. They don't want them. So if they don't want them, I'll take them. I'll be happy to carry them. I'll be happy to represent them and to celebrate them. So,
yeah. And I've noticed the last couple of years, you've called yourself, or at least you've been called a storyteller more than an icon carver, it seems. And so that narrative is certainly pivot there. You also have not only the classes, but also the conferences. It seems like you're doing a ton of speaking there. How many days a week or days a year do you think you're traveling and speaking and doing conferences and stuff like that?
That's for sure.
Yeah.
way too much for the sake of my own family. I'm trying to be a little more concentrated on what it is that I do. I'm trying to focus on the things that I think will influence the project that I find important. So obviously at first I was kind of accepting speaking engagements all over the place, but now I'm focusing a lot on education. That is, one of the ways that the extreme leftists took culture and the kind of revolutionary types took culture was because they realized that education was the place to go. And so from the 70s with Sesame Street all the way to today, there was like just a progressive infiltration of culture by these ideologies. So one of the things we need to do as Christians, as more conservative people, is we have to retake education. And so I talk to a lot of people in the classical school world, for example, who understand that even their curriculum, even though they don't believe in it, their curriculum is completely tainted by kind of Enlightenment revolutionary thinking. It's just that they don't have other books. It's like, these are the books we have. We don't really have other books. We don't know how to compensate for this. And so, man, this is a great opportunity. We have to stand up and represent things, represent beauty, and represent kind of this traditional vision that's not just nostalgic or pastiche. And so, yeah, that's really what I'm trying to do now. Is if I speak, how can I be involved in education conferences, talk to teachers, talk to principals, talk to priests, talk to people that have influence on others, so that this is moving forward.
Yeah, it's like the older and wiser you get, the more leverage you realize that you want per unit of time or per unit of effort. And I think that the press and your approach to speaking and teaching specifically is certainly, from the outside, it looks like it's definitely the best way to go. Now you've got this press. Do you sense that over the next 5 or 10 years there will be a radical scale up in content creation, or do you think the focus is going to be sort of content distribution, getting a handful of products and messages out to a greater swath of people?
So, I mean, obviously, I think it's going to be a mix of both. We were offered some deals to do this with other presses, but we decided to keep the control over the quality and the type of thing we wanted to do. So that also means that as we're growing, we have to build our own infrastructure. It took a while for us to master distribution. I feel like we have now mastered distribution, to get the printing right, to get the systems right, to make sure that our system is flowing. It took a while to get there. I feel like we are there. And now is, like you said, it's both. It's on the one hand to try to get our message out there more, to be able to give access to these fairy tales and to these stories at a higher level of people, but then ultimately fill the gaps that are missing in the future. So we already have a plan in the next few years to increase quite substantially the number of publications we're going to do, and then partner those with also online classes that will be, of course, marketed to the general public, but possibly now more angled even to educators, to people that are themselves teachers or principals or homeschoolers and need to kind of master this to be able to then transmit it to their children. So
Yeah. Well, I imagine the multiples on exits, if you ever do exit, for content creation, classes, courses, stuff like that, especially if they're done at a high quality like you always do, I imagine that's going to be a lot better than just having print materials and that sort of thing.
yeah, and in some ways, one of the things we're doing too is we're doing the story. So we have the story aspect, and then there's the explanation aspect. And so trying to balance those two together, it's like we're telling these stories, but we're also helping you understand these biblical stories, these fairy tales, these classical stories. And so the courses are more of the explanation, and also sometimes we'll publish theoretical works, and then the stories themselves that are actually for kids, that are actually for young people, for anyone who's interested in the story. So it's like those two, a kind of two-prong approach, I feel, is the best way to go if you want to have the most amount of influence.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I can't wait to see what comes of that too, Jonathan, because I have a daughter that's doing Veritas Classical Christian online, all honor school. It's fantastic. I think they've got about 10,000 students, I would guess, all over the place. And it's very interesting to see they're going directly to the source materials, but the explanation comes solely from the teachers there. It'd be nice to sort of have an explainer that comes side by side with that and picks that up. But I think you've done a great job. I don't know if you follow the work of Dr. Luis Marcos. He does a great job explaining the classics as well. There's just a handful that really do a great, honest, interpretive, and expository analysis of the great stories, the great literature. And so I think there's going to be a big need for that coming online. Like right there, you've got that sort of trend back away from the new age, the anti-family, anti-establishment, back into the classics. And I suspect it'll be a good long trend. And I saw that you guys are launching the final of the Dante trilogy.
That's right.
Which is exciting.
We're doing Paradiso, which is it's the hardest one to read, but if you get through it, it's actually the most enlightening. And Dante for us has been really important because in some ways Dante did what we're doing now. He did it for his time, which is to be able to synthesize and to represent the ancient knowledge, whether it was pagan or Christian, represented in a coherent way into a world that was changing massively. And that's what we need to do today, is to be able to remember and to reconstitute our own heritage and our own tradition and be able to present it in a manner that's compelling and that makes sense, that doesn't feel idiosyncratic to young people.
Yeah. So I went to public high school, so that's a little bit of a disclaimer here. I've always felt that the Inferno was the greatest of the three, and I felt a little bit saddened by the quality of Geo by the time I reached that. Is that a common sentiment, or should I be looking at this in a different way, Jonathan?
Well, the thing is that Dante tells us in his own trilogy that people prefer hell. We actually do prefer hell. It's so funny because I remember, I forget what movie it was in, but there's some guy complaining about how heaven is boring. And the thing is, it's funny to think about that because actually, if what you're interested, like of our normal interest, which is if we're completely drawn in by our passions and our sense of drama and all that, then heaven will be boring. That's where we don't want to go. We just stand around worshiping God all the time. Why would I want to do that? I'd much rather be in a whirlwind of pleasure and pain. So I think that it's harder to read because it's the most intellectual one. It's the one that is, of course, demanding more of your attention. It's easy to pay attention when you're constantly encountering bigger and bigger monsters that are doing more and more horrible things to more and more people. And so that's easy to pay attention to. But when you're trying to figure out what's the relationship between Bernard of Clairvaux and Mary, it's like these things are not what most people are interested in. But if you put the effort in, I think that it'll be very rewarding.
Okay, that's very helpful. I did something really interesting, and I would encourage this if you ever have the opportunity. I knew a few months in advance I was going to go to Florence on a specific day. I was renting a boat with some people and did a 10-city stop, and one of the cities was Florence. So I knew precisely when that boat would dock on the coast and we would drive into Florence. And so I began reading the Divine Comedy, Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. So the very last, the 100th canto, I read it the morning with a latte on the boat, walked off the boat, got in the car, and was in Florence an hour later, or whatever it was. And seeing Dante's home, seeing where Beatrice was buried in the church with her father, seeing all of that really made it come alive and feel realer than it should have.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's
so
great.
I highly recommend that.
It's a good way. Dante is one of the most powerful writers exactly because he's able to connect the loftiest subjects with the most immediate thing. And so there's a layer of his story that is deeply personal. Obviously, the fact that Beatrice is his guide, the fact that he talks about Florence all the time. So he's able to create analogies between his very personal conflicts and the highest of highest. And so that's why he's the West's greatest writer, probably.
Yes. Would you ever do one on Milton?
I mean, maybe. I think so. I mean, Milton to me is a little. There are some issues, I guess, with Milton. I mean, I think it's because of at the time that he wrote it, but he's deep in certain types of Protestantism that I don't necessarily yield at this moment. And also, it's kind of interesting to realize that in some ways, the way that he portrayed his Lucifer character ended up being the pattern for the modern world, basically. And so it's as if we've turned Lucifer into the good guy when we look at Milton's story. Actually, I mean, that's what Neil Gaiman, who wrote Sandman, he did that in his series, where basically Milton's Lucifer is a kind of heroic David Bowie kind of rock and roll figure who doesn't want to play his role anymore, cuts his own wings off and wanders off. And then that series Lucifer that's on Netflix is like a downstream from that. So Lucifer is the hero of our world. Anton LaVey was kind of right when he said most people are Satanists, they just don't know it. Because we have this revolutionary, we have this rebellious, this idea of the value of rebellion, the value of self-determination as being completely good, but that is definitely not. And so it's weird that Milton in some ways framed it in a way that ended up turning on him, where that character became a hero.
Yes. The idea that that art and story really interplay off of one another. I think about the Milton, what is it, Gustavo or Guave? Is that the guy that who did the great renderings of that? Although I guess one of the more popular versions of that. I think about that, but I wonder. I guess this is a kind of opening question for you. Do you ever sense, or do you ever get the feeling that sort of the musical, the auditory aspect of the interpretation of not only of the text of some of these great passages, but also the art of these great passages? You ever get the sense that musical modality is missing?
Oh, it depends. I mean, I think I'm not a very musical person, so I'm not the best person to talk about that. But I think that the fact that, for example, the poems are written in verse is a tribute to musicality. Although it's not, doesn't mean that there's melody, let's say, in it, but verse itself is musical in the way that it's presented. And so I think that both Dante and Milton have a kind of music. They necessarily have a kind of musicality in the text. So music, for sure, in terms of Christianity, I think that these three are always integrated. And so if you go to church, that's why there's music. There's music at church. There's your participation in the story in terms of the gospel and in terms of just a liturgical moment, but then there's also the sermon. So all of these are kind of integrated in the full experience. And it really is, the modern world has done us a disservice to some extent in the way that we understand art. This idea of art as objects of contemplation it's a deep mistake. Traditional art is actually participative. It's actually something that participates in your life. And so we're not used to thinking of, for example, a public monument as art. We think of Picasso as art because it's actually iconoclastic and rebellious and kind of fetishized, right?
Yeah.
But the way that traditional people understood art was more like the public monument, like a statue to our founder or a statue to something we care about that reminds us, and it's embedded in the architecture, it's embedded in the story of the land. That's the same with music, is that people in the ancient world didn't listen to music. That's a very weird idea. The idea that we listen to music, I don't even know. That's not an activity that existed for ancient people. It's like music was part of something. It was, you played music to dance. You played music to worship God. You played music to celebrate the king. These are the reasons why you played music. The idea that you would just sit there and listen and go to a concert is a very modern phenomenon.
Okay. So we have some rapid fire questions that came in from Twitter.
All right.
And so I would say let's kind of target these at 10 to 20 seconds if you've got anything. And you feel free to pass. Okay.
Right.
Okay. So this comes from Mostly Not Working on Twitter. How would you prepare for a Joe Rogan appearance?
How would I prepare for a Joe Rogan appearance? I don't think I would. I think I would show up and really try to be as natural and improvisational as possible, because I think that's what works with Joe.
Okay. Did you prepare at all for the big Russell Brand appearance that came around Christmas time?
No, I never prepare for interviews.
Okay. Wow. That's cool. I like that. That nonchalant swagger. But it's authentic. I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. All right. Okay, number 2. Christian Baxter asks, what does beyond the pale mean symbolically? Beyond the pale.
Yeah, it means that it's crossed the line. It's over what is normal. It has in some way transgressed. I think it's relating to that Charlie Kirk video that I made where I said that that we've gone beyond the pale.
Okay. Okay. Did you ever have a chance to meet Charlie Kirk?
No, I was actually going to. We're actually in discussion with him to have me on his podcast. And then, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I had dinner with him about 2 or 3 years ago,
Hmm.
and I have the opportunity to meet with a lot of very bright individuals who are way smarter than me. It was the only case, Jonathan, where I've ever sat down with someone, and it was a 3-hour dinner, where I sat down with someone, and it was frightening that the degree of his intellectual prowess was frightening about everything: theology, culture, politics, everything that you could imagine. But he was so humble and kind. It was so amazing. And so, it was really shocking to lose him. And it's amazing too. I mean, because we not only lost him, we lost Vadi Bosham immediately after that. You lost John MacArthur earlier, kind of around the first year or so, and then JVP's out. There's a massive void in the culture, especially for young men right now. And
Yeah,
you
and
know,
Dennis Prager too. Dennis
and Dennis,
Prager,
that's right.
kind of has been out of the game. So yeah, no, it's been a very weird few years for sure.
Yeah. Do you get a sense of maybe where all that available traffic is going to go to? I mean, do you think it'll be new people, or you people that are already on the platforms that'll be
I mean,
able
we're
to
already
absorb some of
seeing
that?
it. They're already seeing it. It's not. We'll see. It's not. I don't think it's particularly positive right now. In some ways, a best way of saying it is that you killed Charlie Kirk. Now you get the more extreme version, and that seems to be what's happening. And the people that are getting attention right now are, let's say, much further than what you would have wanted from Charlie Kirk. So
Yeah. Well, now they're on the subject of politics. Here's another Twitter question. Alexander Forgay asked, if Jonathan was a spiritual advisor to Trump, what would he suggest Trump to do?
my goodness. I mean, I think that Trump's biggest issue is that he has no humility. There's something of him that resembles King David sometimes, but King David humbled himself before the Lord, and I think that's what's missing of Donald Trump.
Yeah. I had an opportunity to have some private time with the president as well. He's very gracious, very humble in person, and but outside of that room, I mean, he's a monster. He's a monster, and I'm glad he's on our side. He's our monster.
Yeah, no, he's quite something. I saw him. I never met him, but I saw him a few times. I saw him at the National Prayer Breakfast, and it was something. It's half great, half absolutely frightening. You're just
Yes.
holding on by your fingernails, and you're like, "Oh, how's this gonna go?" You're not sure. It's wild.
But I try to do my best to speak at about an 8th grade conversational level. I try to write maybe a 5th grade or 4th grade. I think he's speaking at a 2nd grade level, but it's just magical what he accomplishes with that.
Yeah, I
It
mean,
doesn't make
he's
sense.
a populist, and I think that is for sure one of the mistakes that the left made in attacking him was basically suggesting that he's too ordinary, that he's too regular, like the way that he talks is not sophisticated enough. But in a democracy, those types of insults will not go well. And so the type of elitism people treated Trump with, I think, massively backfired against them.
Okay. Yeah. I think so. I think so too. Got another rapid fire question about Charlie Kirk. Okay. How exactly, technically, he says, this is from Barrett Velker. How exactly, technically, does Charlie Kirk function as a saint in the current Protestant worldview? What do Protestants miss about the utility of saints?
That's two questions. It's not, you can't answer that in 10 seconds. I would say that he functions as a martyr. That is 100% sure. And so
Yeah.
I think whether to understand him as an explicitly Christian martyr or as a martyr in a more general sense, that has definitely been the role that his assassination has played. And so people have rallied around him and have in some ways concentrated themselves and been able to eliminate some of their conflicts in order to rally behind his name and behind his legacy, and that's a positive thing.
Yes. Jarek Naylor asked Jonathan to explain why the Bible uses more numerous than the sand on the beach so much? Surely it means something symbolically.
More numerous than the sand on the beach. I mean, it just means that it's beyond quantity. It's something that can't be counted. It's a type of quantity that is beyond what can actually be accounted for.
Okay.
So it's getting close to chaos in that sense. It's the unquantifiable, but at below. There's an unquantifiable above, which is that which has certain qualities, the spirits, these types of things. But then there is also a kind of unquantifiable below that's equivalent to the lower waters, like the dust. So think about it like the dust. Think about, if you want an image, the dust that God pulled in to make Adam's body was more than can be counted, more than the grains of sand that can be counted.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Dr. Ricardo Wagner out of Germany asks, I'm going to sanitize this question a little bit, Jonathan. You meet a lot of really bright people. You meet a lot of really intellectually bright people and people that are really seeking truth. How do so many of them brutally miss the boat on religion?
Yeah, well, I think that we still have some hangover from the new atheism. There still is a remainder of the idea that sophisticated people don't believe in these superstitious things. So I think that is definitely still around, and that's very frustrating to deal with. It's also the incapacity of people to think in hierarchies, even very smart people, to be able to notice that the way that religion presents itself, it presents itself at all the levels. So it's there for a totally uneducated old grandmother to believe, and it's there for the highest person to believe. But you have to do the work to be able to see the nuances and the subtleties that the uneducated grandmother wouldn't understand.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of, I hear a lot of Islamic scholars talk about the knowledge of Islam as the one true religion and Christians as the false religion. But somehow the truth of Islam, in their words, can only be understood properly in one language. But the one that they're arguing about that is not a truth can be interpreted, it can be translated into a multitude of languages and still retain that kernel of truth. It seems that Islam is confined by language. It's a prisoner of itself. And it seems that it's a very similar thing to be confined by your intelligence, that these sorts of priori type situations have to be met in order for a truth to happen, rather than just roaming wherever it might happen and letting it be.
Yeah, for sure. It's a very frustrating thing, because some of the structures that people exist in, for example, if you have a kind of materialist reductionism, you don't believe in miracles. But the problem is that you can never believe in miracles. There's nothing I could show you that would make you believe in miracles, because your system a priori eliminates the possibility that there are higher intelligences or higher things that are acting on us, and therefore you're in trouble. And so I think our work now is in some ways to show people and to help people see that, in fact, to have a verticality, right, to be able to account for vertical relationships and vertical intelligences actually affords more reality than reductionism. And that reductionism actually doesn't afford enough of the world. It limits you in terms of what it is you can see and what it is you can engage with.
Yeah. And it seems to me that in the end, that verticality, that morality, how you adapt to those that are below you and the God that's above you, if you kind of take that and you kind of add with it the competency and how you deal with sort of the situational elements of the earth, then that verticality and that horizontalness begin to become your identity, become who you really are in the end. And they want to sort of contain that to hear what they can see with their eyes and what they can calculate with their calculators.
Yeah, but it's at this point, I think there are still remainders of it, but it's almost done. Like, we're almost done with this stuff. I've interviewed some interesting people recently that have really demonstrated that even Dawkins' selfish gene thing is just completely not enough. It just doesn't account for enough reality. And you see it because Dawkins himself, for example, when he talks about the meme world, he just doesn't want to talk about it. He says, "Oh, this is completely something that doesn't interest me. I don't know about it. I'll let the sociologists talk about the meme world." But it's actually, there are ways to articulate the relationship between biology and the meme level, let's say, of reality, And that is a far superior way of looking at the world, but that doesn't look like what you want it to be. It means that you have to believe in some type of vertical causation.
Yeah, yeah. And so, when you say me, are you talking specifically about the symbolisms of mean, like of what they, of the underlying truth there? Or are you talking about it in a different reference?
Well, even in terms of how certain aggregates of meaning and certain aggregates of behavior, how they continue to perpetuate themselves. That's what Dawkins in some ways is talking about, is that there are certain memes. Let's say fashion is an example, is a simple example of a meme. It's a behavior and attention that congregate together and then runs through culture. And there are some memes that get perpetuated for longer and some memes that get dropped off. And so it's almost like he calls it a new primeval soup. It's almost like a new Darwinian world where memes compete with each other for attention and to survive in the economy. So the way you cut your hair, there's like a millions of it. The way you cut your hair, like shaking hands is a meme. Like everything that we do, let's say on top of the human level, is this, all the behaviors and things we care about and attend to and tell stories, all that stuff is like the meme world. It's a very insightful thing that he came up with. It's just that he doesn't want to formulate the relationship between the meme world and the biological world. He's not willing to understand how, a good example would be how memes constrain genes. That's something that a lot of biologists don't want to talk about. So let's say you have a certain behavior in a city, right? So you have virtues that you try to pass laws about. So what happens is people who break those laws get put in jail. Because they get put in jail, it means that their genes are less likely to survive. And there's an example of how the meme world is actually acting back down on the genes and isn't just a kind of expression of the genes up there. It actually works back down. And so these are the kinds of things that, and then what happens, like this is more complicated, but what happens is at some point the memes, because they constrain the genes, they actually get encoded in the genes. And so you have memes that get encoded genetically. And there's a transition between certain types of learned behavior and certain types of behaviors that are passed down through generations. And you can imagine that would need to happen, that there was a transition between things that certain beings started doing, and then at some point it becomes encoded in the genetics. So it means that there's a top-down thing, like there's a top-down relationship. And so you need to find new theories that are able to account for that top-down thing. But once you open that door, then you have religion to deal with. You can't say that religion is just a mind virus. That's ridiculous. Like religion does exactly that. It ends up encoding down the reproductive level and deciding who gets to reproduce and who doesn't, you could say.
Yeah. It's relying on rote logic, not realizing you only get facts, but you'll never get truth. It's the same mistake we make by lusting over a woman and having lust instead of love. It's all these replacements that we get. We always get the false thing instead of the true thing, and in the end, we end up with nothing. And that's an unfortunate situation. One final question, Jonathan, and this is I don't know if the algo gods have been serving up a lot of kind of final conversations. You've got a best friend that's taking the spaceship to Mars with Elon. What do you say to him? That kind of stuff. It's been like a lot of kind of final comments, final words from my dad. What my mom told me before she left for a trip, that sort of thing. I think a lot of people on this area of the internet, or a lot of us, we saw that update from Michaela a couple of weeks ago. Very struck by that. And so we're all going to be incapacitated at some point in our lives, whether temporarily or permanently. We never really know when that's coming. And I think part of that is so that we have a little bit of burn, a little bit of itch to get our work done before we know night's coming, for sure. But if you could only have one more conversation with JVP, let's say he's getting on the spaceship with Elon to go to Mars forever, and you only had 60 seconds for that one final conversation, what sorts of things would you communicate to him?
I mean, it's the same thing that I've in some ways, it's been the thing that I've been talking about ever since I know him, ever since the beginning, is that we have to participate and embody in these patterns that we're talking about. And this includes being part of a body. That is, it's not only a moral question. right? It's a participative question. And therefore, true Christianity also includes being baptized, submitting to an authority, being in a body with your brothers and sisters, communing to that. And that is the actual shape of the world, but it's one that we can't just think about, that we have to engage with. And that's always been my hope for Jordan, is that at some point he comes in and he kind of enters into the body.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. I really appreciate that. I found myself praying for he and Tammy a lot more the last few weeks. I think out of that collection of men we spoke about earlier, it seems that he's probably the one we most need to make an about turn and come back in force like he's already done once before.
Yeah, there's a lot left to do, as you noticed, and a lot left to say. So I hope that my friend also comes back and helps us through some of the hard things that we've been going through.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Jonathan, what's the best way for folks to interact with you and Symbolic WordPress? And what are 2 or 3 kind of to-dos that we should do to really get plugged into what you're doing?
I mean, so the best thing is to go to thesymbolicworld.com, and that's where you kind of get everything. You can have access to my YouTube channel, which is Jonathan Pageau, but you find that on that website as well. You find the books that we're publishing, the courses that we're giving, all of that. And we also have articles, and we have a discussion group. All of that is there on thesymbolicworld.com.
Excellent. We'll link to all that below. Jonathan, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the pod. I sure appreciate it.
Thanks, Rick. It's been great.